Have you ever really stopped to ask yourself whether relationships are genuinely the key to happiness, or if they're just another well-designed trap that society has convinced us to fall into? Think about it. What if everything you've been taught about love, commitment, and the ideal relationship is holding you back from living a truly fulfilling life? In this video, we're going to challenge everything you think you know about love, relationships, and personal independence. We'll explore some of the uncomfortable truths about modern romance and why it might just be time to rethink everything we've been told we should want from our relationships. But that's just the beginning. As we dig deeper, you'll uncover the real reasons so many people feel lonely, even while they're still in relationships, and the truth about how social pressures and the idea of forced monogamy keep us trapped. Society often pushes us to stay in relationships that don't serve us, all while making us feel guilty or incomplete if we choose to be on our own. If you've grown tired of constantly trying to play by society's rules, and you're ready to explore a life where you genuinely understand your own needs, desires, and freedom, then stick around. By the time you finish watching this video, you'll see how choosing to be single, when done by choice rather than by circumstance, can be the ultimate act of self-respect and personal growth. You'll understand why embracing freedom, rather than adhering to outdated traditions, can lead to the most fulfilling relationships of your life, both with yourself and with others. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I recommend doing so and turning on the notification bell so you won't miss any new videos. Your support means a lot to me, and if you find value in this content, you can help me spread these important lessons by liking and sharing the video with others. If you like the direction of this conversation, please comment 1 below. If not, feel free to comment 0, and let me know how I can improve to better suit your needs and interests. Now, let's dive into this important discussion. The world is full of people trapped in relationships they don't truly want, pretending to be happy because admitting that they would be better off alone feels like a public failure. These couples are often formed out of inertia, following the well-worn paths of tradition and expectation, simply because that's how it's always been done. And what's even worse is that society celebrates this emotional tragedy as the ideal. The version of love we've been sold isn't love at all. It's a cage, beautifully decorated with illusions. It promises to elevate us, but in reality, it only holds us down. In the beginning, there's the fire of passion, but as time goes on, when those flames die down, all that's left is the smoke of weariness and monotony, disguised as commitment. But why do we do this? Why do we stay in relationships that no longer serve us? It's all to avoid feeling alone. We pay such a high price to avoid looking in the mirror and accepting the truth that we are, in fact, alone in this world. The whole thing begins with a seduction, which has evolved into a bizarre pantomime, a parade of egos dancing for attention, more absurd than watching two peacocks strut around in full mating display. What was once a search for genuine connection turns into a social game, where the winner is the one who lies best, acts best, and has the most enviable Instagram profile. And somehow, we call that romanticism. It's strange, isn't it? How most relationships start with these well-crafted lies, pretending to be someone we're not, putting on a facade of humor, charm, and perfection from the very start. Then, when everything falls apart, we're somehow surprised. But what else could we expect from a castle built on falsehoods, especially when we've all participated in its construction? And if you think that love, over time, can fix everything, I have some bad news for you. Love doesn't fix anything, it complicates it. Romantic love, as most people understand it, is little more than a socially accepted form of possession. We've been taught that to love someone is to need them, and that happiness is impossible without another person by your side. But here's the hard truth. If you need someone else to be happy, then you're already lost. The real problem isn't being alone. The problem is living with someone who makes you feel emptier than you would be if you were alone. You end up losing your essence, your individuality. They tell us that we'll be happy when we find our soulmate. What a humbling concept that is. It implies that we came into this world incomplete and defective and that we need someone else to make us whole. But you know what? I'd rather stay whole on my own, thanks. Society pressures people to have a partner with the same urgency it uses to push life insurance policies, like it's some kind of essential safety net. And if you're single, society looks at you with suspicion, as though there's something wrong with you, as if you're a social failure. But here's the thing. The absurdity doesn't lie in being alone. The absurdity is in seeking company simply out of fear of what others will think of you. Love, as it's been sold to us, has ceased to be a choice. Instead, it's become an artificial need. You don't love because you want to. You love because you've been taught to. True love doesn't come from the fear of being alone. It comes from the freedom of being okay with who you are, by yourself. The real reason we stay trapped in empty relationships is because we fear loneliness. It's clear now, right? But here's the irony. Most couples are more alone within their relationships than they are outside of them. Alone in every possible way. As the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre once said, if you feel lonely when you're with yourself, you're in bad company. And that's how the deception keeps on going. Couples often come together not out of a true desire to be with each other, but because they can't bear the thought of being alone. What starts as a mutual connection can quickly turn into a contract of emotional dependence, where surveillance and control replace true affection. If you find yourself needing to know where your partner is at every moment, you don't have a healthy relationship. You've built an emotional prison for yourself. Infidelity becomes the haunting ghost of every relationship, and sadly, it's logical. In a society where everything seems disposable and commitment is no longer valued, fidelity has become more of an exception than the norm. We live in a world where people constantly check phones, sneak glances at their partner's social media, and live in a constant state of paranoia, fearing that they're being cheated on. Isn't that exhausting? What kind of relationship is built on the fear of the other person getting bored? If you're already checking your partner's phone, the relationship has already crumbled. It's just that neither of you dares to admit it yet. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 1 below to let me know that you are still here with me. But here's what's worse. Even when there's no infidelity, you're still trapped by suspicion, especially if your partner is attractive and active on social media. The issue isn't that infidelity happens. It's that it's almost inevitable in a world where temptation is everywhere. We live in a society that has made cheating so accessible, so instant, yet we still act like monogamy is this sacred ideal, something that only exists in fairy tales. If most couples cheat or have been cheated on, why do we keep clinging to the myth of eternal fidelity? Love built on control and constant surveillance is not love, it's a lie. Imposed fidelity is a form of torture that no one should willingly endure. Sex, one of life's greatest pleasures, too often becomes a battleground in relationships, where desire is suffocated for the sake of maintaining an unspoken pact. But what kind of life is that? Nature itself makes it clear. Animals don't force themselves to commit to one partner for life. Even when they do, they still experience the freedom to mate with others in their species. They engage in sex and experience pleasure without the fear that their freedom will be condemned or stripped away. Humans, however, are the only creatures that turn sex into a routine obligation, bound to the same person regardless of how they feel at the time. And we call that commitment. Sex should be free. It should be experienced as one of the most fundamental pleasures of life, enjoyed without guilt and the restrictions of outdated social norms. Why should anyone be told they can't enjoy sex when they choose to? Casual relationships, as long as they're consensual and mutual, are a natural expression of human nature. However, sexual freedom is a silent threat to those who feel imprisoned by emotional expectations. If you embrace the freedom of pleasure without commitment, you're labeled a man whore, or worse if you're a woman, labeled with terms that seek to degrade and shame. But the real immorality lies not in embracing freedom, but in pretending to be pure while secretly fantasizing about betraying the person next to you. What's holding you back from living the life you truly want? The norms that even those who preach them don't respect? The hypocrisy of those who push for fidelity while secretly fantasizing about breaking those very rules? I don't advocate for unchecked sexual libertinism, as it often leads to obsession and mental instability. But there's nothing wrong with living according to your desires, without shame or restriction. But what's wrong with having sex when you feel like it, and believing it's perfectly okay to do so? We often choose to wear chains because we've been conditioned to believe that sex outside of a committed relationship is a sin, a moral failing. Yet, forced fidelity, where you stay bound to one partner out of obligation rather than genuine desire, is perhaps the most absurd prison ever constructed. And then there's the massive hypocrisy. As I've pointed out, society often criticizes others for embracing sexual freedom, while secretly yearning to break the very same rules themselves. Those who preach monogamy the loudest are often the ones who struggle most with repressing their instincts. The cage may weigh heavily on them, but they refuse to leave it. They stay, bound by rules that don't fit their true desires. The reality is clear. Forced monogamy creates nothing but tension, not love. Human desire is as natural as the need to breathe, and trying to suppress it doesn't make it disappear. What you repress will eventually surface and cause chaos. If you've watched my other videos, you know I've talked about how these kinds of repressed emotions can destroy a person over time. If you decide to share your life with someone, let it be because you're working together toward a common goal, not because you feel like you need them to be complete, to fill some gap in your life. Love isn't about sacrificing yourself for someone else. It's about shared interests and shared dreams. But can a relationship last when desire fades? The problem isn't having a partner. It's the societal pressure to get married because that's what's expected. It's this mentality that leads to the perfect recipe for an unhappy life, a life where you feel trapped by tradition. It's hard to believe, but some still think that following social norms will guarantee success in their emotional lives. These are the same people who believe that government can always protect their rights and make everything right. True freedom, though, comes when you stop playing the partner game just because you're supposed to. If that idea makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's because, deep down, you know I'm speaking the truth. They say that fidelity is the greatest act of love, but what they don't tell you is that fidelity, in many cases, is driven more by fear than love. It's the fear of losing the other person, the fear that they'll grow bored of you, or that they'll seek something outside of the relationship that they don't find within it. This is where modern love has become twisted. What is supposed to be an act of emotional connection becomes nothing more than a series of insecurities masked as commitment. How can we call it love if it's based on constant surveillance and suspicion? I've mentioned this before, but it's worth repeating because it's become so normalized we hardly even notice it anymore. We spend so much time looking over our shoulders, checking each other's phones, reading between the lines of their silences, manipulating conversations to convince the other person of our loyalty, and using countless strategies to feel secure. But when that distrust takes root, the passion fades, and all that's left is a relationship held together by inertia, or worse, by the bond of a child that was created out of the illusion that things would be better. Love was never meant to be an exclusivity contract. It should be an agreement of mutual respect, where both people understand that freedom is part of the relationship, not a threat to it. When you recognize that true pleasure lies in freedom, relationships can transform, not because there's a lack of control, but because desire is no longer a taboo subject. Of course, this idea doesn't fit the script most people are following. The fear of losing a partner becomes so overwhelming that many prefer to suffocate them with it. They think that control ensures fidelity, but all it does is breed resentment. The constant need for love and validation from a partner is a currency that, over time, loses its value. Eventually, when desire reappears, most people suppress it, hide it, or deny it. What could have been a healthy, open, and honest relationship instead becomes a slow-burning lie. Real love doesn't need to imprison anyone. If you have to lock someone in a cage to keep them from leaving, you've already lost them. The truth is simple. A bird will only return to an open cage, not to one that's locked tight. If love is real, it doesn't demand control or limitations. It's about freedom, mutual respect, and choice. Being single is the ultimate act of proving that you don't need permission to live your life fully. We live in a world where relationships are often glorified, but singlehood stands as a direct threat to the control structures that our society relies on. A person who walks alone isn't afraid of losing anyone. They're not dependent on anyone else's validation to feel complete. Above all, they refuse to fit into the preordained roles that society has created for them. And that's the real danger, the freedom that comes from not needing anyone. Society has conditioned us to believe that being alone is a mistake and that if you're not partnered, your life is somehow incomplete. Singlehood, however, isn't an accident. It's a choice that most people lack the courage to make. Those who criticize this choice are often the same people who are stuck in relationships that drain them, relationships they refuse to leave because, deep down, they're terrified of being alone. The truth is that the idea that coupledom should be the societal norm is misguided. Relationships should be the exception, not the expectation. The true natural state of being human is freedom. Look at animals. They have it right. Wolves hunt in packs, but they sleep alone. Lions live in pride, but their relationships are not bound by emotional contracts. They move on when necessary. Only humans have turned love into a perpetual binding pact, one that denies the most basic truth, that we each have the right to exist without strings attached. Emma Goldman wisely said, "The worst slavery is the one where the slave loves their chains." And so, many of us live, finding comfort in our relationships, but knowing deep down that the security they provide is nothing more than the most comfortable prison ever designed. The idea of being a couple is like a safety net that promises stability, but often it becomes an emotional trap that stifles personal growth. It's a paradox. Society looks at single people with pity, as if they've been condemned to a life of solitude. Especially for women, there's this pressure to find a partner quickly, as if time is running out. The idea that someone must always have a partner is treated as a problem that needs solving as soon as possible. What they fail to see is that single people aren't suffering. They observe, with clarity, how the rest of the world drowns in relationships that have long since expired. Those who are single often find themselves more fulfilled, more complete, and free from the emotional burdens that come with staying in relationships simply because it's what society expects. Singlehood isn't a failure. It's not something that needs to be fixed. It's a conscious, empowered choice to live life on your terms, without the need to answer to anyone or meet anyone else's expectations. It's not about being lonely. It's about choosing your path and taking full ownership of your life. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment below to let me know that you are still here with me. And sometimes, I'll admit, I take a certain satisfaction in watching how couples criticize my lifestyle choices. These are often the same couples who live embittered by resentments and obligations, trapped in the expectations that come with their relationships. They struggle in their emotional prisons, but instead of confronting their dissatisfaction, they turn their frustration on those who dare to live outside the prescribed norms. The pressure to be in a relationship doesn't stem from love, it comes from fear. If a single person can live happily without the need for a relationship, what does that say about the rest of us? The single person becomes a symbol that love is not something that must be pursued at all costs, and that can be a very uncomfortable truth for those who have been conditioned to believe that romantic attachment is essential to their worth. For a society obsessed with romanticism, this is an unacceptable reality. But being single isn't about lacking love, it's about having an abundance of self-respect. It's a conscious choice not to negotiate your freedom, not to divide your time, your body, or your energy in exchange for fleeting illusions of security. It's a rejection of the endless game of seduction and possession, a game where everyone pretends to be uninterested while simultaneously vying for attention. It's an exhausting, schizophrenic cycle of constant validation seeking. Being single means breaking free from that farce. There's no need to pretend or compete. There's nothing to prove to anyone. The single person doesn't have to seduce. They simply live. They don't engage in rivalry for attention. They exist in peace. As Oscar Wilde famously said, Loving oneself is the beginning of a lifelong romance. If life in a couple doesn't bring personal growth, then it's not truly love, it's an anchor weighing you down. A relationship should be a complement to your life, not a necessity. Singlehood allows for relationships without the burden of contracts, without emotional debt, where pleasure can be shared freely and without the expectations of possession. Casual relationships, when they're honest and mutual, can be an extension of freedom, not a threat to it. Singlehood, when fully embraced, becomes an act of brutal sincerity. It's the choice to stop deceiving yourself with false promises of forever love, and to accept that you can love without possessing, enjoy without promising, and share without losing yourself in the process. It's a profound understanding that you don't need anyone to complete you. You are whole just as you are. Singlehood isn't a transitional phase. It's a destination. And that destination is called freedom. It's a place that few people reach because so many get lost in relationships that should never have begun in the first place. At the end of the day, being single is not a punishment or a flaw. It's an opportunity to live fully, to truly get to know yourself and to discover what truly brings you happiness, without imposed commitments or unrealistic expectations. As we wrap up today's discussion, I want to take a moment to ask you, what have you learned so far? What ideas or insights from this video have resonated with you the most? I'd love for you to share one thing you've learned and how you plan to bring it into your own life. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I truly value hearing your perspective. If you enjoyed this video and found it valuable, please don't forget to leave your comments, like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps us continue sharing meaningful content with you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.